Hello, my name's Charlie Winston, and this is my podcast called As We Are, which is inspired by my most recent album, As I Am. It's discussions with people who interest me and inspire me. Some of those people you may know, but others you may never have heard of. But that's not the point, you see, because I'm simply interested in people. So, without further ado, I shall let you discover this episode. Take me as I am. The following conversation is with an old friend of mine called Christina Greer. Based in New York, she's a professor of political science with her primary research and teaching interests being racial ethnic politics, American urban centers, presidential politics, campaigns and elections. She is the author of Black Ethnics, investigating the increasingly ethnically diverse black populations in the US from Africa and the Caribbean, and is a frequent political commentator on several media outlets. She's often quoted in media outlets such as the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Newsday, and the AP. She is the co-host of the New York-centered podcast FAQ NYC and is the producer and host of Aftermath on Aussie.com, and also writes a weekly column for the Amsterdam News, which is one of the oldest black newspapers in the US. She did this podcast from her apartment in New York City, so the sound is sometimes a little bit compromised due to traffic outside, but I think it's good enough for all of us to understand what's being said. So, without further ado, here is our conversation. Go up here a little bit. Right. So, here is my podcast of As We Are with Dr. Christina Greer. But I don't know. I don't personally call you Dr. Christina Greer on a regular basis when we talk. How can I call you? Should I stick to that name?
I feel like since we've known each other since 1999, I think we can go with Chrissy.
Okay, great. It's a lot easier. So
right, it's a lot easier for you to call me the thing that you've called me for 20 some odd years.
Yeah, exactly. But anyway, so we'll go into how we met soon. But At first, I need to introduce you as the Associate Professor of Political Science at Fordham University. That is correct, right? Mm-hmm. And also the author of Black Ethnics, a book that you wrote published in 2013. And I'm sure there are many other roles by which you can describe yourself. And so before we go any further, I'd like you to list a few. Could you describe a few roles that you play in your life?
Yeah. Well, I have a podcast called The Blackest Questions, and that's a podcast about kind of Black history, which I argue Black history is American history. So I invite people on and ask them questions about sort of lesser known facts. You know, a lot of Americans know about Martin Luther King and Frederick Douglass, but this is about inventors and history and dates and places that we should all know as Americans, I would argue, maybe just as citizens of the world. And then I have another podcast called FAQ.NYC, and that's like a super wonky, nerdy New York City politics podcast. We talk about the mayor and city council and, you know, land use and, you know, subways. So I have a passion for cities and urban politics. So that's another podcast that I do.
So you're a podcaster. That's one of your roles.
Yeah, I'm a podcaster. And then I do voiceover stuff for TED Ed. So people write videos. I've written a few, but people write videos about different topics, and I record them.
So what about non-professional roles you play in your life? Like family, friends, like this kind of thing.
Well, I'm a pank.
What's that?
Which is it's a professional aunt, no kids. I'm very, very proud of that role. So I just do fabulous things with my nieces. Yeah. You know, I've just like never wanted kids.
Yeah, fair enough.
You know, and like that's kind of a statement that, you know, a lot of people find odd. But I like traveling, and I like traveling with these two really interesting, amazing mini versions of my sister, who I'm very close to. Yeah. So they're similar, but not the same. And then, you know, I travel a ton. And so COVID was a little difficult because I was landlocked for a while, you know? And for me, it's like, I'm like Mark Twain. I have to leave America to understand America.
Wow, yeah.
Like so much
James Baldwin,
of who I am. Yeah, I mean, he liked to live in France.
He said that
Twain liked to just like come and go. He liked to come and go.
Yeah. No, but I mean, he said that he had to get out of America to understand it better. At least he said that on something I saw.
Like Khalil Gibran says, the mountain is clearer to the climber when the climber has left the mountain. That's the way I feel about this country. I have to leave America to better understand.
Very interesting you say that, because that reminds me of another podcast I did recently with a friend of mine, old friend as well, Wayne Ellington. I don't know if you ever met him, but he's anyway. He made reference to a mountain. It was a biblical reference of an eagle flying when it senses danger, senses a storm coming. It will fly up to the top of the mountain to protect itself, but it has to.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's another thing. So.
Well, I mean, I'm a birder, so I'm totally into that. So I am.
So that's another role you play.
Yeah, I'm a serious birder. I don't know birds, the way, major people who do serious birding. But, I have my binoculars. I'm like a tree hugger. So I study cities. I live in cities. I can't imagine not living in a city. But there's really great bird diversity in cities. There's great bird diversity in New York, which is where I am.
Yeah.
And I really got into it. So I actually, have written articles for Living Bird magazine, which is a birding journal that I'm really into about how it is that we can kind of take some time and just take a beat, and observe birds and patterns and protect them and all these.
A quick bird question. What, except for a pigeon, what's the most common bird in New York?
Oh, I don't know. We've got lots of seagulls. We've got lots of
peregrine falcons as well, right? They live in.
We do have a few, in the Bronx. There folks have seen some. We've got little sparrows, lots and lots of sparrows. Because we're around so much water, we've got actually because we have these marshes, we've got really interesting bird diversity. I mean, you can see egrets, if you sort of go out in Queens and near the airport. The airport always has really great bird diversity. Yeah. There's so much water around there.
So when I met, when I mean, like you said, we've known each other since 1999, and we met when you were in SOAS, which is this School of African and Oriental Studies, isn't it?
Oriental and African Studies, part of University of London.
Yeah, and I was a singer in a reggae band, and I came and did a gig at SOAS, and at the end of the gig, you showed up and went, hey, like that, and we ended up having at least that's how I remember it. I mean, maybe you have to.
It's probably that sounds about right. And I'm usually that person's like, hi, I'm Chrissy. Yeah. Everyone should know me.
And so that's been it ever since. But what's always struck me about you is your joie de vivre, as they say in France, and you're a fun person. But what is amazing is how you express yourself with fun and joy, even in conversations which are really difficult, and how you've kind of turned your professional life. I've never seen you in college or university, sorry, being the teacher that you are, and I'm sure you're very serious when necessary, but I can also pretty much guarantee that you're presenting stuff with a certain amount of joy as well. And when I see your podcasts, you're fun, and you just you put this element of fun, which is amazing. How would you describe your teaching methods?
Well, I take teaching really seriously. I'm from 4 generations of educators. So I used to teach early mornings, 8:30 in the morning. For college kids, that's the crack of dawn.
Yeah.
So I have to make it entertaining. And there's, some professors are like, it's not my job to entertain you. It's all about the work. And I'm like, no, I actually need to pull you in and get you interested in it. So my teaching style is very conversational.
Yeah, cool.
So I'm just having a conversation. I know the material so well. It's not like I have to read notes. I've got, slides just to help kind of guide me so I don't go off on, too many tangents. But the same way, having a conversation with me is like having 15 different conversations at once. It's like we've got a whole bunch of stuff on the table. That's basically the way I teach. So I'm like, hey, hold that thought, because let's have a quick tangent. Let me tell you about this. So I'm just trying to make it seem like, so much of American politics is you have to understand history, but it's filled with drama and intrigue and shady characters and chaos and mayhem. And for some students, I'm teaching them, for the first time, helping them think about these people that they've heard about, but in a different lens. Because it's college now. So we're not going to have this sort of lower level conversations anymore. So you've always been taught that George Washington, who's our first president, is this amazing character. It's he was a rapist, slave owning, a horrible criminal
Yeah.
who hunted down this little black girl to the last day that he died. He ripped the teeth out of his enslaved Africans and wore them. So we have this whole story about how he had these wooden teeth and he had dentures, and isn't that cute? It's like, no. He was like, he did all of these things.
Yeah.
And that are real. And so how we can hold two things to be true at the same time. So like, yes, he did sort of help develop this nation in the midst of a genocide against Native peoples, keeping that in mind too. But, he did help found a lot of the democratic principles of this nation. He helped sort of leave office when he should have. So we had peaceful transference of power that sort of set us on a path, and we're on a shaky path right now. So like, I can have a conversation about this man, and now all of a sudden, like, oh my gosh, who is this? So now they're more interested in that's not just George Washington, but the idea of democracy.
I would like to ask you what makes us who we are, but I'd like to frame it in the in language, and because what I'm really interested in is like expression is so much about what words we choose, how we express ourselves through words, language, etc. And then there's dialect as well. And it's been really interesting listening and watching to your podcasts, because there is a certain dialect that we use for certain people. I mean, we all do. We're from this group of people that we know to this group of people. We'll change the way we speak. And I was wondering, like, in that sense, how do you find what makes us who we are in terms of dialect and language and that kind of thing when you're doing what you're doing and going between different groups of people?
Are you talking about like code switching? Or just dialect?
Oh, I guess I'm talking about code switching, perhaps, yeah.
Okay, because I mean, they're two totally different things. So the first one about like dialect, I've been trying to get a lot better at like choosing words that are the specific word that I want to use.
Yeah.
Because that way there's no confusion, So like with my students, when they say slave, I'm like, you can say whatever you want, but I'm just letting you know I don't use that word anymore. And so they're like, oh, well, what do you mean? Because it's like slave is like a noun, pen, table, chair, slave. But I was like, I use the sort of dialect of enslaved African or like enslaved person, just so it reminds me that it's a relationship between two people.
Yeah.
One person is doing the enslaving, the other person is enslaved. So there's that part that I'm trying to get better at, to like be very deliberate so that I can have a clear picture of what I'm talking about and like how I fit into that narrative. But then in the States, and I mean, obviously in England too, and in other countries, we've talked a lot more about code switching. There's actually a black celebrity right now.
Could you just
so
describe what
code
code switching means exactly?
So it's sort of like when African Americans primarily, it's like if I'm talking to my girlfriends and I'm like, hey girl, what's up? Ugh, and we can just sort of have like a shorthand.
Yeah.
But if I'm in my department meeting where I'm the only black person at the table, and I have, I have to prove myself consistently, then I speak in a more formalized fashion. I might speak slower. I might sort of use all my fancy vocabulary words from, all the years of schooling, as opposed to, hey girl, what up, right? When I'm speaking to other people. So that's code switching, and a lot of people do it in extreme ways.
I think we all do it. All the time.
To a certain extent. Yeah. But for African Americans, especially in the States, it's been a huge conversation.
Of course.
And there's a woman who just got a major sort of television contract to have like either a cooking show or a talk show. And I think they wanted her to essentially code switch in a way that she wasn't comfortable with. And so she was essentially saying, I became a YouTube star being authentic in who I am. So now that you want me to be a TV star, I'm not actually going to start changing the way I am and speaking differently, because that's actually not why people fell in love with me. People fell in love with me because I'm authentic.
Yeah.
And so, Steve Harvey, who's kind of a major TV star in the United States, African-American man, he hosts Family Feud. He has his own talk show. He's hosted like beauty pageants. He's had sitcoms. He's toured as a comedian, for the Kings of Comedy with 3 other comedians. He's a major deal.
Yeah.
And used to be a radio personality actually when I was in high school in Chicago, and has sort of worked his way up during the comedy circuit and media worlds. But he's very he comes from kind of like a black Southern tradition, and he, doesn't speak the Queen's English, if you will. And he talks openly about time and time again how different agents and producers and lawyers and folks who make TV are like, well, if you change, you become essentially palatable to white people.
Yeah.
Right? That's what they're saying. And just change the way you speak and, speak this way and, mimic this person, then you'll be successful. And he's always made the argument, but I've always been successful.
Yeah.
And so the more I double down on who I am and I speak how I want to speak and I don't code switch, that's actually what helps me maintain.
But I guess it's also, educating both sides in a way. Clearly the Black community are making that effort to, like you just said yourself, about it's not just about making an effort to become to be able to communicate better with white people or something like that. It's just about being more precise in what you want to say or knowing with whom you're communicating with. That's
exactly.
the point. And so, of course, the Black community is going to be making that effort, but also the white community are going to have. We need to make an effort to understand the kind of the codes as well that Black people have. I mean, I enjoy listening to those conversations. I'll enjoy listening to let's just go back to the first example of you in your podcast when you introduced today. I was watching one with the girl who was a lawyer, and she became a TV host.
Oh, Ebony K. Williams. Yeah,
and
she's a lawyer, but became Real Housewives of New York star.
Yeah, that's it. And I enjoyed all the language. I mean, I wouldn't personally speak like that because it would be ridiculous. but
can't imagine.
But it's kind of nice to educate and shift my own sense of of paradigm in terms of language.
Well, I think what's also interesting is and I throw around this phrase all the time, but having written a book about it, I need to not. But when we talk about the Black community, it's there is none, right? Yeah. I mean, there is and there isn't, because I wrote about ethnic communities, but there's class differentials, there's geographic differentials. So there's some Black people who fundamentally believe in code switching.
Right.
They think it is imperative, it's necessary. White folks should not sort of hear our sort of dialect when we're together and comfortable. Others are just no. How I am with my girls, at 3 a.m. is how I'm going to show up at work.
And maybe both are right. Maybe both are right.
Yeah, both can be true at the same time. I'm somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, but I mean, if this is what this is all about, it's about who I am. It's about as I am, I am. And if you feel that you're in terms of, it's the same as religion. We can't, if we're going to be a democracy, as it were, if that word even has any kind of clout anymore. Right. But if we are going to be a democracy or think democratically, then religion has to have it has to be free for everybody and to choose what they do and to respect that that's your way. And in the same way, it's with your choices to how we communicate with each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The other song that I wanted to sort of lead into a question was often the one I start with in the podcast, and it's algorithm. And do you think that the way that we encounter algorithms, the way that we encounter technology, it has an effect on equality in the sense of the way that you're dealing with equality? And is it affecting? Is it helping or is it hindering the use of?
Yeah, it's so interesting you say that. I literally was having this conversation with someone 2 days ago, because.
So you've done some preparation. I'm glad.
Yeah, no, I mean, I've been thinking about this a lot because here's the thing: technology and these algorithms are now linking like-minded people, which on the one hand goes back to the beginning of our conversation, where isn't it wonderful that we can be friends over space and time, right? Largely because of technology, right? I still write letters. I just don't write them as much as I used to, because now it's I can send you a quick text or a quick WhatsApp or a quick email. I mean, there's so many ways that I can actually communicate with you easily, seamlessly, actually. While you're traveling, I'm traveling, you're at base camp at home, all these things. Yeah. And then we can find like-minded people. So there are people who enjoy your music and they don't live in France, right? They can live in New Zealand or America. And so there are these positive ways that we can find other people like us. Yeah. And before, I always use that, it's T.S. Eliot, C.S. Lewis, we can't figure out who actually said it, but like we read to know we're not alone. Nowadays, in a lot of ways, it's like we're online to know we're not alone, right? Is it coincidence that both of us have on red glasses right now? Like there's something that, is like linked us and we saw something and it's interested us. So that's the really positive part.
Yeah.
The negative / scary part is people who have more sinister intentions and aren't filled with joy and kindness and love can also find those folks very easily and around the world. So when you think about someone like Dylan Roof was the young white boy from a few years ago in South Carolina who walked into the black church and killed 9 people after he prayed with them and like sat with them for hours and they welcomed him. And he's, 16 years old and just opened up and killed elders and whatever. And then the cops, took him to Burger King before they actually arrested him. That's a whole nother part of what this country is. But here's the thing. In the pictures that they found, in his belongings, he's wearing a Rhodesian flag. So the flag of Rhodesia before Rhodesia becomes Zimbabwe.
Right.
And like that flag is like linked to the Nazi flag.
Right.
And the Nazi flag is linked to the Confederate flag. So you have Germans who can't fly the Nazi flag because it's actually illegal. Yeah. So they'll have the Confederate flag in their possession, right? America never banned the Confederate flag, but that's sort of like a shortcut dog whistle. So it's like you can fly the flag of certain nations that have oppressed people and done atrocities and committed mass genocide. And, when we had January 6th and folks were storming the Capitol, it's like you saw a lot of Confederate flags, you saw a lot of Nazi flags. So like these folks have now been galvanized through an algorithm to join up forces with folks not just in the United States, but like across the world who believe, whether it's white supremacy, whether it's patriarchy, whether it's anti-black sentiments, whether it's anti-Asian, anti-Jewish, anti-Muslim. You can go through all the antis. You can find that group pretty seamlessly. Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, 4chan, Reddit. I mean, websites that I've never even been on, but like we know that they exist and it's super easy for you to sort of put in an algorithm. And then once you sort of put in one thing, it's like, oh, you're into this? Then let's keep digging. And they can introduce you then to sort of new things as well that you possibly didn't even think
and false truths.
Know that you were interested in.
Yeah, I mean, that's very true. It's horrifying in many ways. But I mean, many aspects of the world are horrifying on a regular basis. I guess it's depending on what kind of lens we see the world through, I mean, but of course...
I choose to see it through the positive lens.
Positive lens, but I think there's an element of reality that's always worth checking out as well and not being afraid to see reality. Because it's very easy to, like... an aspect which I've talked about before is how another danger of algorithms is that we can get a very radicalized view of the world. So if you always want to just see good stuff, you can always just see good stuff. It will always feed you that stuff, even if it's not true, and just keep feeding you the same stuff until your vision is so myopic that it's, you're not really getting a counterbalance. And there's this element of discussing and hearing each other's opinion and also being able to speculate about stuff, get things wrong, which no one does anymore because as soon as you're not quite sure about something, we go straight to the thing and text it.
Right.
And I think there's something conversation is also great thing about conversation. I'm going on a slight tangent here, but
I love a tangent.
But a conversation is also about going on tangents, and in the sense that we can get things wrong sometimes, but it's about being able to understand, to listen and understand, and sort of find out stuff together, and some of these radicalizing algorithms that we get into our life, our world, can be completely against that sort of thing, and I think there's a big danger.
Well, I mean, that's why I love teaching, because teaching for me is an intellectual journey.
Yeah.
Right? I have like 3 months with you, 3.5, depending, sort of how we count the semester, to sort of go on an intellectual journey. And where you end up is where you end up. And the great thing is, it's like some people you can see their progress over the span of 3.5 months. Some people you don't see it. It's not like it's not there. So it's like being an educator for me is like sowing seeds. You're just throwing the seeds into the field, you're watering it every class period. And like for some students, you like see a massive crop at the end of the semester and it's great. And then others, they circle back, sometimes a few months, semesters later, sometimes a few years later. And it's like, hey, I finally got the thing that we were talking about. Like, I finally get it. And it's like, it's been 6 years. Who knew? But this is the whole point, like if you've ever had a plant and all of a sudden one day it just flowers and it's like, where'd you come from, But I think that you're so right with this myopic view just because, when you think about it, at least for our right-wing media, I mean, it's like Hillary Clinton, I mean, they talk about her like she's like the president, it's like all the cities are filled with rapists and crime. And it's like, it's just not true. Like you all haven't even been to a city. Like you have no idea, but it's always like migrants are running across the border, raping everyone. It's like, they're not, they're absolutely not. But I think with algorithms now, whatever you're into, you can find your tribe. And there's a good part about that. And there's a really bad part about that as well.
Well, it's like you said about language. For me, and I hope this is something that we're learning as we go with technology, the development of it is understanding, like in the way you said about the code switching, being in the middle. I like the fact you said I'm somewhere in the middle. I think it's great to understand that we've got a part of us, our beliefs, our belief systems, but then.
But here's, sorry, go ahead.
Well, just to say that we have our belief systems, but then there's another side as well, and it's about being able to dip in and listen to it, and then see what you think.
But here's the thing, and this is where it gets a little tricky, at least where we are in the States right now. I believe in hearing arguments. We're all entitled to our own opinions. We're not entitled to our own facts.
Yeah.
So right now, there is this quest of like, well, we can listen to both sides. No, one side actually like is devaluing and diminishing and depleting my humanity. So actually, that's not a conversation that I need to listen to, and I'm pretty firm on that. Right. So it's like, I believe in ideas. I love a long dinner party. That's why COVID was so hard, because it's like I couldn't have these 4-hour wine-filled, Greek style.
Conversation.
Basically. But I think, there's a difference between an exchange of ideas and long-form conversations where we tussle with ideas and someone who's just essentially saying, you don't have the right to exist.
Well, no,
or like, I can look at you and say that, you're intellectually inferior to me because ... So like that, unfortunately, is sort of, so many people who believe that are trying to hide behind, well, see, now Chrissy doesn't want to have an exchange of ideas. It's like, well, your ideas are saying that I'm not a full person. So actually, I don't have to listen to your ideas, because it's not about me feeling good, but you've already actually calcified how you think. You're just now trying to couch it in a both sides conversation.
Sure.
So this both sides conversation kind of came up during Charlottesville. I don't know if you remember when those young white men sort of marched on a college campus in Virginia with swastikas, with Confederate flags, and like tiki torches. And, they were dressed in khakis and polo shirts. And, they weren't, quote unquote, poor. That's also a stereotype. It's like the racists are poor people. It's like, no. They're middle class, upper middle class. And so they were essentially saying Jews won't replace us. Black people won't replace us. Women won't replace us. It's all kind of tied together for them. And then the president at the time, Donald Trump, was like, well, there are good people on both sides. Right. So it's like, and it's like, no, actually, that's not something that we need to be promoting. Yeah. When they're sort of, they've got fire in their hands, essentially saying we're going to burn this country down. And then you sort of see, fast forward to, 2021. So I think that's the difference between like the exchange of ideas that I'm into versus not into.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned Trump. I mean, I probably would never have mentioned this, but one of the songs on my album is called Sweet Tooth. And it was kind of inspired by him and inspired by this, this era that we've moved into of almost like clowns getting into the seats, powerful seats. He was the, ultimate, and I'm not even saying, well, I won't say anything about him except for the fact that I was very happy to see him go, of course, like many other people. But it was just this bizarre period of time. So I wrote Sweet Tooth as a sort of metaphor of someone who's kind of very greedy, and just kind of going in for this kind of and advocating greed in so many ways, and not only greed, but ignorance in so many ways, and lies, like just blatant lying, changing one's mind. I say sweet tooth. I know what's this. You're looking like a hangover that keeps getting worse is the open line. And sweet tooth, sweet tooth, you're looking like you want to be some kind of Jedi. Sweet tooth, getting loose and getting lawsuits by the dozen. Sweet tooth, who are you fooling with your trumped up talk, you big baby? Sweet tooth, Scooby-Doo ain't got a thing on you, but that's the way you roll. So it's just that. But I mean, I was using him as my inspiration, but it was really like there's this TV host in Latvia or something as well, and it was the Ukraine actually, the prime minister of the Ukraine. He was a TV comedian, and I'm just saying nothing against him. I'm sure he's gone through a very hard time these past months, but it does seem like we've moved into this bizarre era, and it's like a storm that we don't quite know how it's in, which much like the ecological issues we've got now. We can't really tell which way the weather's moving or where it's going to go next. What do you think about that? Do you think we're in this kind of
so as you said before, I've been thinking about these things a lot. Like, I don't know if we're in scarier times or if we're just more connected with people and ideas where we just now know the dangers that have always been there. It's just they're so much more clear. But it does feel like we're just on edge. Yeah. Just globally, like a lot of, if you look at sort of democracies that have crumbled, America's she's at her expiration date, and like what happens? We've never been so globally connected economically. So like if she falls, and falling and faltering may not look the way it used to look, say 100 years ago even, but like what does that mean economically for everybody else? You sort of think about like when Obama became president in 2009 and he had to like save the banks and save the economic situation in the United States. It was because it's like we would have fallen off a cliff and dragged the rest of the world down with us. Yeah, sure. I always think of it as sort of like if you're falling off the bed and you're like, no, and you like grab all of the covers and like you end up pulling everyone off the bed too. Yeah.
And then you wake up and it was just a dream.
It was just a dream. So maybe we're just in a dream. Who knows?
Simulation.
But I sometimes feel that way. Sometimes I feel like I'm on like the Truman Show where I'm like, what is going on? Is someone just following me with the camera?
That's I can talk about that a lot.
I feel that way a lot these days. But I don't know. It feels like I live in a city. I live in a large city. It's 9 million people. It definitely feels like people are on edge. And as someone who studies cities, it's like, listen, when your money's funny, and like we're going through economic trials and tribulations globally, but definitely, in the States, that just, your blood pressure's up. You and I were friends when I was a broke college student, you were a broke musician. We barely had, like 10 pounds together between the two of us to like get some fish and chips and a beer. So like the level of stress and limitations that you have on your life when you don't have money is real.
Oh, for sure, without a doubt.
And not saying that money cures everything. That's not what I'm saying at all. But it does bring down a certain level of anxiety and stress. So like how you can...
It relieves a function, a functional element. There's a functional element of money that you need.
There are a lot of organizations in the States that are doing some really interesting experiments, like giving single mothers like $1,000 a month. Just
like that.
You use it for however you will, rent, food, whatever. But what they found is like the mothers come back and they're like, this is the first time I can say yes to anything. Because everything in my child's life is no. Yeah. So like, can I get an ice cream? No. Can I get, McDonald's? No. Can I go to, soccer practice? No, because we don't have money. So everything's a no because there's no money. But when you have a little bit of pocket change, it sort of allows you to be a yes person. It allows you to sort of approach the world from a positive, not from a negative. So I say all that to back into your question, which is the world feels a little stressed out right now.
Do you really think that? Because you're an optimist, you're a positive person, but do you still feel that way?
I'm a pragmatic optimist.
Yeah.
But dealing with people, I traveled a bit this summer.
So you felt it also in Europe as well?
Yeah, it's things that normally wouldn't stress people out feel like they have a bit more of an edge.
There's a song called "This Storm Too Shall Pass," and it's taken from a biblical reference, but it's It's kind of like being able to see, either being able to identify that something's coming, but also when you're in it, are you able to be in the center of the eye of a storm and take a step back and see that this is not, this is going to pass?
Yeah, because I can't believe I'm quoting Winston Churchill, but hey, I mean, you're British. So it's like, his whole thing was, if you're going through hell, keep going. Don't stand there and look around, like keep walking. So it's like, I've gone through, like graduate school or like after my car accident or, I've had trials and tribulations. Now, granted, I've never been, in abject poverty. I've never had sort of some real struggles.
What is your biggest struggle, your biggest storm in your life you've been through?
Well, I mean, the first one was like this car accident where I was out of school for months,
Right.
and I had to like physically heal myself. It's like I had broken arm, broken leg, broken head, just that was mentally, physically, and emotionally just a very difficult time period, and also the doctors at the time, I mean, it's America, they had me on all types of drugs that I took myself off of because I was like, if I don't take myself off of these drugs now, I'm 16 years old, I will be on these drugs for the rest of my life.
16?
16.
Oh, that was 16.
So like,
I didn't know that.
I'm literally on Oxy at 16, and I was like, I got to get off this. Like, I can already tell because I can just tell. So that was the first one. Then I think, going to graduate school, it was just a lot of like racial and sexual harassment that went down. I'm at an Ivy League institution.
Do you think that's led you to your drivers of what you do, what you advocate, what you talk about, what you teach? Do you think that's what drives you to do what you do and talk about? And
I like puzzles. And the biggest puzzle, I mean, honestly, I'm born and raised in the States and like, spent a lot of time in like strong Black communities, but also with a lot of white people my entire life. And like, this country is a puzzle to me that I just can't seem to figure out. This is why I love Mark Twain, because I really identify with him trying to solve this puzzle at the turn of the 20th century.
Incredible, right?
I'm on the board of the Mark Twain House. That's how much I love Mark Twain.
You're on the board?
And yeah.
Wow.
And the thing is, in high school, I hated this man. When you read Mark Twain, and the problem is, it's not Mark Twain. There's just a lot of teachers who don't know how to teach Mark Twain.
Okay. Oh,
that's the issue.
Yeah, right.
The writing is there,
Yeah.
but it's just people don't know how to like extrapolate it in a class, especially in a class where you have like one Black student, and it's like, okay, so we're just all gonna sit here and say the N word, like really, and like, what are we doing? So, yeah, I like trying to solve things. But the thing is, I think, because I've had just honestly like a relatively charmed life. I have great parents. They got divorced when I was in college. So it's like, I'm not from a perfect family, but like at the end of the day, my family's my family, strong family. They believe strongly in friendship. Both of my parents, like my dad's mantra is like, friendship is essential to the soul. So like a lot of their friends are family. Their kids are my cousins. We've grown up in that strong, extended family type of way. So I think that there's just a lot of goodness out there.
Yeah,
there really is.
For sure.
And there's a lot of beauty. And because I love cities, I also have to love nature because you sort of get glimpses of it in cities. But, I have to leave New York to love New York.
Yeah, for sure. No, of course. But we have to sometimes... Well, that leads me on to a song called Exile. And I mean, it's written on different levels, but I often talk about it as a means of conversation because it's... I live in France. I'm English, and I live in France. It's given, and also my music has, it's mostly popular in France and Europe, but it hasn't gone back so much to England. So in a way, it's kind of had its own element of exile, and then there's also this element of exiling myself through trauma as well. Growing up in a hotel in a very chaotic bohemian world. No family life, not a lot of family life. Of course, there was family life, but
because it's 4 of you, right?
Yeah,
4 siblings?
3 brothers and 1 sister, and so I kind of found through music and art and all that sort of stuff, I sort of found a place to exile myself, to find it, but now since I've come and I live here with my wife and kids, and we're a Franglish family, over the years, I've sort of been reflecting a lot on what this all means in terms of my identity, and I'm talking about this like compared to what we talked about earlier on with what you talk about in black ethnics and stuff. When I read that book, I was ironically seeing my own story and much of what you're talking about, where I'm like, who am I? Like, what am I? Am I English? Am I still English now that I have a French family and I live in France and I'm learning French, and I'm now learning the codes of talking, not just talking in English, but obviously when I talk French, a lot, if you want to be understood, you have to kind of put on the body language as well, and the general sort of mannerisms and the jokes, the kind of funny ways to say stuff. Saying things in my Winstonian funny ways doesn't really go across very easily in French.
And we both speak English, but we can have a whole conversation and have, our definitions of the same words are totally different too. So like English humor is not American humor.
Absolutely.
That's why I hang out with a lot of comedians, and I'm fascinated by comedians who do shows across countries, because I'm like, you're speaking in English, but American English. And like the jokes have to translate in like these very culturally specific ways. Yeah.
I just podcasted podcasted. Can you podcast someone? I podcasted a comedian actually, he's an English comedian living in France. That was why we sort of like, kind of magnetized. It was interesting hearing him about that same thing, really. But I think you're right. We do understand ourselves better by being getting moved, not getting moved, but moving. I mean, there's obviously a big difference between choosing to go somewhere and or being exiled. However, I'm interested in self-exile, which is something that we do as a coping method, which is what I was talking about earlier on. But when I read about just coming back to the sort of the movement, as it were, like Frederick Douglass or Alauda Equiano, these, and I'm reading that. Do you know Alauda Equiano as well? Yeah, and I read his book this year, which was actually through a book I read called Debt. Do you know the book Debt by David Graeber?
I saw it. I haven't read it.
It is.
I think it's on my shelf.
Incredible. I often fall asleep to it. I've listened to it like 5 times because I just love like the madness of the history. But it's talking about the history of debt, and it all originates with slavery, going back to the Mesopotamian times, to the Greek times, to the Roman times, to the medieval times. I mean, there was slavery throughout, and it was a currency. It was a currency before there was even the idea of bullion, which is money, which is actual coins and gold or anything like that. It was just a currency selling your children or selling your wife, or it's just madness.
Right. Or building a country for free.
Yeah, well, exactly, as like it's happened like in Egypt,
free labor.
It happened
America.
Yeah, and then the last major one, and probably the biggest one ever in the history of humanity, was like, America.
Let's build this country with free labor.
Yeah, and it's
so. I mean, that's like the memes of now that the President Biden is trying to absolve student debt, And there are a lot of Republicans who are like, how could he do that? That's not fair. People shouldn't get free stuff. And it's like, so let's talk about this free country that we have. All this stuff was built for free.
I want to ask you, like, what's your vision of that whole thing? Do you think it's possible to, like, there's this other, if I may, I'm going to slightly digress again, but there's this Canadian writer called Stephen Jenkinson, and he has a book called Come of Age, and it's called The Case for Elderhood in a Time of Trouble, and he's talking about how important it is to look after our ancestors. It also made me think of, that's kind of links back to the observation about you, your gramps. Yeah, gramps. I love that. And I was going to say grandparents, but you got there first with gramps. That was great. And I'm asking you to open my eyes here, like, with that being ancestry going that far back into sort of the struggles of slavery and all that kind of thing, do you feel there's an element of exile that they lived through? I mean, absolutely, probably the most brutal sense of exile, where you're just ripped from your home and suddenly it's social death, as what's his name, Orlando Patterson puts it in his book. But do you think that's part of the thing to take on when you're grappling with that history?
Yeah, I mean, but I
personally
don't even
speaking?
know if we have to go all the way back.
Is that
you know,
too
it's like if
crazy
I just
to go that far?
no, not at all. Not I go way back all the time, but like, for some people, it's like, well, I wasn't around, so I shouldn't have to, deal with it. So it's like, okay, fine, let's just deal with my grandparents,
Yeah.
right? It's like there's a certain type of exile that you have if you can't be a free person in your own country.
Yeah. Of course.
So
Yeah.
you don't want to talk about my grandparents. Let's talk about my parents.
Yeah.
My parents went to segregated schools.
Yeah.
They're both
I mean, it's
in
recent,
their 70s.
right?
Recent.
Yeah.
Recent. So like we also have to recognize like some people got benefits that others didn't. Like and they're still walking around among us, So and that's a certain form of exile as well when you just can't be a full person. Like my mom's never gone to school a day in her life with white people.
Wow.
She's only 74 years old.
Yeah. Yeah. That's crazy.
Like she only went to segregated schools.
Wow.
So
recent.
and it's not like she didn't want to, go to schools with other people, but like she lived in a part of the country where it was not possible.
Yeah.
So, and my dad integrated his high school
Yeah.
in the 60s.
Right.
So like this is like recent memory. And so I think that there's a real element of like being a stranger in your own country. So it's one thing like, I talk about voluntary and involuntary immigration in my book, but like, you're a voluntary immigrant to France.
Yeah.
But you still feel this level of like exile sometimes and like you're not fully an expat because you can come and go to England as much as you want, but like there's something different and you're like straddling two worlds. And like they're quasi-similar worlds in the sense that, they're both democratic nations and, it's not like you went from England to, Thailand or something like that. But it's different and you feel it and you know it and there are ways that you feel othered.
Yeah.
And so I think what's complicated and the reason why I'm so interested in trying to solve this puzzle is like, because sometimes I feel like in the 21st century, I'm in exile in my own country and it's my country.
Yeah.
Like real ancestry wise, like I've been here longer than most white people. So why is it that I feel like the exile or why is it that I'm made to feel like the exile in what is ostensibly my country more so than anybody else?
Yeah, sure.
If we really want to get technical, it's like start putting cards on the table. It's like, well, it's more mine than yours. So why is it, what is it about this black prefix? What is it about my skin color? What is it about all these other things that make it such that I don't feel fully comfortable and whole and safe in my own country?
But what was so interesting about reading your book, Black Ethnics, is that, and it's something I don't think that I had really crossed my mind until I read the book, is how there's, like you said, black people can and I'm sure I've made this mistake many times, and just in this conversation, it's like put them into one pot, and
it's a lot of pots.
So many pots.
Not everybody gets along in the pots.
Exactly, and you've got people who are like you call them African Americans, and then you've got people coming who are new African American or new Americans or new.
Yeah, so
there's different categories.
Say Black Americans, like for people who've been here forever, who are like descendants of slavery, right? U.S. chattel slavery. I say Black Americans just to make it easier, and then people who are immigrants from Africa, I say African Americans, and then people who are immigrants from the Caribbean, I say Caribbean Americans. But don't forget, you've got so many Caribbean nations that have a lot of different histories, and a lot of different relationships with England, with the Americas, with France. with the Dutch. So like when and how they were colonized makes them a very unique country. So like when they come here, they have very specific and unique relationships. So like someone from like Martinique or Guadeloupe or Haiti, all three colonized by the French, very different relationships. Right? So, you think about kind of your British West Indies versus your US West Indies, and so like that complicates, or African nations, those that are colonized by the French versus the Dutch versus the Portuguese versus the British, or the Italians. Like,
yeah. And the thing, what ties all these things together, if I may interject, sorry, is how when we're talking about the exile and when we're talking about who am I in all of this, and it's also. It's all. I don't know if you know. I don't know if you remember. I used to have really bad backache all the time. I mean, my whole life, I pretty much had. I didn't always talk about it, so maybe we don't kind of recall it. But it was so chronic when I was on tour by my third album that it was like I was close to quitting music because I couldn't face going on tour with such chronic backache. I tried everything, and then, I mean, everything, obviously medicinal, okay, and then like all the alternative medicines,
like acupuncture,
reflexology, Reiki, osteopaths, physio. I mean, I regularly had physiotherapists, osteopaths, massages wherever I went. You know, it's just like, it was a money pot apart from anything. But, you know, also anti-inflammatories, like always had a packet of anti-inflammatories. And then I went to trazepams and all that sort of stuff to try and alleviate. Anyway, the point is that I did EEG scan. Sorry, not EEG. That's the brain. But SPECT scans. You know, I got to like 2015, 16. And I was like, right, I'm gonna get my whole back X-rayed. And I did the thing, and I went to see the neurologist, and he said, "Well, Charlie, you've got a very healthy back." And I was like, "No!" And then, wow.
Was he saying it was psychosomatic?
Well, he wasn't. He recommended me a lifetime of drug taking of ibuprofens, basically, and taking it 3 or 4 times a day, which was actually not at all what I wanted to do. But I'd gone down so many roads. I kind of decided that psychosomatic was probably a good road. Anyway, I discovered this book by a guy called Dr. John E. Sarno, who's from New York. He died in 2017 when I discovered him. And he spent his whole lifetime developing psychosomatic medicine. And it started off, half of his career was working with physiotherapists. Second half of his career, he switched to psychotherapists. And some of them have extracts in his last book. And I actually called one from this cabin in summer of 2017, and then went to meet them. I had to have a consultation, had the consultation, and then worked with him for 9 months. And after that, I was pain-free. And I haven't really had any pain ever since. It's just like completely miraculous. Anyway, it sent me down this path of diving into the unconscious mind, which is where it all stems. It's all about protection. It's my unconscious mind trying to protect me, basically. And what I've learned is that it's all about programming, how we've been programmed, how we program ourselves. And this is what's led me to write this album as I am, because now I'm really on this path of observing myself as I am, without being identified too much to the am, and more to the I as the conscious mind.
Yeah.
And it makes me realize how we have got so much programming, like algorithms, going on in our unconscious mind that we don't even realize. An example of that is, which ties in the whole conversation, is when I saw the film on James Baldwin. I don't know if you've seen the film Meeting the Man, James Baldwin in Paris. It's such an incredible documentary because he has 3 ex-Eton boys come from London, white boys obviously. We're like, "Oh, you're a really great writer. We love what you do," and coming in to meet him and do a documentary on him, which he agrees to. And then like a week in, he's like, "I can't talk to you," and they're like, "Why? We love your work." And he said, "But you don't. There's no way I can communicate to you what I'm trying to communicate through my work." And it wasn't through any fault of their own. It was through the fact that they're so preconditioned, like that we need a huge paradigm shift, which is basically is happening over. Paradigm shifting takes a long time. Another song is called Shifting Paradigms. But it takes, for me personally, to shift my paradigms, it's taking a lot of examination on things. Some things pop and go, "Oh yeah, cool." But I think, understanding who we are through the exile thing and everything, it's also about understanding how we've programmed ourselves and how we operate on a level which is not even, we're aware of.
Right, I agree with that 1000%. I mean, I think I have a really strong fortitude to block out a lot of stuff, because if I didn't, I would just go insane, especially living in America. Like, when, it's so interesting, like when the Me Too, so for example, like when Me Too happened a few summers ago, and, people start writing all these stories about what happened. It's like my boss, massaged my shoulders or like said I had beautiful legs or, like kissed me on the lips or whatever. And, I like texted a few of my close friends and I was like, is this sexual harassment? Because if so, like, we're on like 10 for 10 in this shit. Like, so there's certain things that have happened so frequently and just with such reckless abandon. I just thought like, oh, it's normal. Like, oh, it's normal that most of the men I've ever interacted with in a professional setting have accidentally kissed me on the lips.
Yeah.
I just thought like, oh, well, we went in for a hug and like they accidentally went left and I went left and boom, we kissed. It's like, really though, Chris? Like, back up. Like, really? So it's like, wow. But like, that's something where if I thought about that, if I thought about all the instances from age basically 15 to I'm 44 now. You'll be 44 soon, so
when?
TikTok. But like, you're going to be 44.
Me, thanks.
I just turned 44.
Yeah, okay, right. Congratulations. You made it.
Right. But it's like if I allowed myself to think about like all of the slights, the racial slights, all of the like what I thought was like low-key sexual harassment, then I was like, wow, people are really like suing folks and like making millions out here. It's like, oh my God, who knew that these were like, litigable offenses? I literally just thought it was like the cost of doing business of like being a woman in a professional setting. So I think that there's a certain part of the brain that allows one to like protect themselves.
Yeah.
It's not always great, but it's like, I was just in a board meeting Zoom call with this older gentleman who I don't like, like I didn't like him before he said anything. And it's like, oh good, my gut was confirmed. But like we were on a board call once and he was like, I saw you on TV. You were actually pretty good. And I was like, what's the actually for?
That
like
language, once again, back to
yeah, so language. So it's like either say nothing or say nothing, right? Yeah. Like I actually don't need your I use compliments and insults kind of, they all go in the same bucket. But like, so they're just little things that kind of, you just ignore. Like, because if I let them sort of make an imprint on my spirit, I would go insane. So like I only exert energy for people who deserve the energy.
Yeah, for sure. That's great.
And that's not always easy, but like, I've gotten really good at it. Turning 40 is like, and it was like a miracle drug. And everyone keeps saying turning 50 is like even better, and turning 60 is like the best, and turning 70 is like, so it's like my filter and my, right, exactly. But it's like, my threshold for BS and nonsense is diminishing by
big
the day.
Time.
And I love it.
And also on my half, it's for myself as well. Like doing these podcasts is very interesting, listening to my voice. I'm like, did I really say that? I'm going to find that. I'm sure when I listen to this again, I'm like, well, Charlie, shush, just stop talking.
Well, that's what I feel about reading things I've written from years ago. And I'm like, I'm sorry, what now? Like, that's what makes me nervous about, I have sometimes I have writer's block because it's like writing seems so permanent, and like I respect so many writers from, obviously I respect Baldwin. He wrote years ago and his stuff still holds up. Yeah. Twain still holds up. But there are a lot of people, just like musicians, right? And just like actors, it's like things you did or things you said, or comedians, right? It's like it doesn't hold up over time. That's why like the great comedians you can listen to 40 years later and it still holds up. Like you listen to certain early Eddie Murphy, it's like, this doesn't hold up, dude. Yeah. Like you're like some of it does, like some of it's like
of the period of time, yeah.
Right. So it's like sometimes I write things and, I have like a weekly column for the Amsterdam News, which is like the oldest black newspaper in New York, and one of the oldest in the country. And like, I've written, it's a weekly column. So like, keep on, I got to say something 52 times a year. I'm not always going to be a bullseye. And so, I've been doing this for like 6 or 7 years now. So it's like I read some of my earlier columns and I'm like, girl, little girl, what are you talking about? Do you know what you're talking about? No. Yeah. But hey, listen, it's all about extending grace. As my therapist, I always tell my therapist, I'm like, hey, it's a global pandemic. And she was like, Chrissy, I think we're leaning on that phrase a lot. And I was like, hey, but it is. It still is.
Yeah, absolutely. But you're very, like, we're gonna wrap up very soon. But there's just one more thing I want to ask you, which I ask everyone at the end, right? So firstly, but there's two, because it was just in answer to this, what you just said, which is you are very at peace with who you are these days. You are very, it seems, I don't know, that's a question. It's not a statement. Was that you knocking over the
Oh yeah, I
microphone?
am. I feel great.
You do, and and do you think that
do.
doing all the work that you've done on presenting yourself in podcasts and television and stuff like that has helped you to come to terms, not to come to terms with, but be more at peace?
Yeah, and I think also, my dad always jokes around because he'll be 75 in December, but he's always like, "Hey, I'm in the fourth quarter." So it's like, "Hey, Dad, do you want to come to New York and have dinner?" "Yeah, I'm in the fourth quarter." You want to go to the theater?" "Hey, I'm in the fourth quarter."
What is
So
the fourth
essentially.
quarter?
The fourth quarter of his life.
Oh,
If we're playing sports, he's in the fourth quarter. So it's let's just enjoy things.
Yeah.
He's like, my whole point is to enjoy my kids, enjoy my grandkids. So I think that right now I'm it feels like the halfway mark. I don't know if we're lucky. It's the halfway mark, right?
Yeah, sure.
It feels kind of like the halfway mark if we sort of go into our 80s, maybe 90s, but we're not guaranteed, So it's I don't have time to be around people that I don't want to be around for extended periods of time, to do things I don't want to do. I mean, obviously, listen, I got to go to work. I'm not going to, sort of have a tin can, everyone pay my bills. But, it's I got divorced recently, and there's no beef against my ex, but it's just sort of hey, if we're going to do, this doesn't seem like the thing that we need to do for the next several decades. It's been grand.
I mean, you've just beautifully segued into my final question, which is related to one of the song that I always end up the last question on, which is "Letter from My Future Self," and it's a letter that I wrote to myself when I'm 84 to now, and giving myself a little bit of advice as an 84-year-old, which is quite difficult to do when you're not actually living in the future, but. You just perfectly segued into that final question. What would your, let's say, 84, 90-year-old self write to you today?
Yeah.
If you can envisage that.
Well, two things. One, and this is what I think has been so helpful about COVID and lockdown. Time is merely a construct.
Exactly.
So it's when I'm 84 or 90, I don't necessarily have to feel 84 or 90. So it's and hey, listen, I'm Black, so I probably won't even look it. So I might as well just but it is something, I did a meditation the other day, and she said something about lengthen your body, your permanent home. And I loved that because it was sort of this is kind of just the shell. We can change, obviously, and we change how we think, we change how we feel. But this physical body actually is the permanent home. Yeah. So I'm always telling my students, I'm take care of your teeth. You don't want to spend a ton of money. I'm take care of your eyes. I think my eyes have deteriorated in the last 3 years because of so much screen time. But it's stretch and do all the things so that the permanent home can actually let us keep up with the mental agility that we hope we'll have at the age of 90. And then also the second piece that I think I'm getting better at, I'm not great at it, but I'm getting much better at it. It's I'm extending myself grace. And the more I do that, the better I am at extending other people grace. But it's listen, I forgot to call you back.
Describe exactly what you mean by that.
Just not being so hard on myself. Yeah. Not doing the things that I said I was supposed to do. And by that, I mean, okay, I meant to text you yesterday, but I'm texting you today. Yeah. It's okay. Yeah. I meant to send that email yesterday. I opened up my computer this morning. I realized I forgot to hit send. And I was about to be Chrissy, you were supposed to send it yesterday. And it's guess what? It's less than 24 hours. They'll live. Yeah. It's not that big of a deal. So extending myself grace. So the more I do that with myself, the more I do it with not just my students, but other people in my orbit. And so now when people cancel plans, they're I'm so sorry. And I was hey, no excuse needed. Sometimes you don't feel like doing the thing you said you were going to do. Yeah. We may have had dinner plans and we made them 2 weeks ago and the day came and you don't feel like it. Exactly. And it's okay. Just sort of letting people know, but, people are but, I know your schedule and I know how you get. And I was hey, I may have gotten annoyed before, that, if you canceled plans, because, there is a certain element, fine, respect our time. But at the same time, it's You don't have to come up with an excuse.
No. And I think it's
Like,
about being at
it's
peace with who
okay.
you are. The more you realize
Yeah.
that, the more you are actually as you are and at peace with it. But what you said, I
Yeah.
love what you said about time, because I just, it helped me write the song, realizing, I was like,
Yeah.
hang on a minute. If I'm writing this letter at 84 years old to myself now, that means I'm still here, which
Yeah.
means everything's fine, And so I
Everything's- and
actually
everything's-
compressed all of the future
Yeah.
and my past into this present moment and realized, actually, this is really all that matters. Of course, that's a cliche, but it's absolutely true. The present moment is the only thing we can really trust.
And I'm trying to get so much better about being in the present and not thinking too much, wallowing about the past. And that's not really my thing. My thing is usually trying to prospect too much and like think about the future too much, and like what I should be doing to get there. But I think there's sort of one, I've always said, ever since like my teens, I've always said the best I'm going to look and feel is in my 60s. Like that was always going to be like my peak season. And then we go from there. But it was like, so everything in my life has actually just been working towards my 60s, because I'm like, that's when I'm going to look amazing. That's when I'm going to be the smartest I'm ever going to be. Like I've always sort of put that as like my Mount Rushmore of like badassery. But then too, like whenever I would ask my grandfather like how he's doing, and I said this to the security guard yesterday when I was going to my office, and he's like, hey, I haven't seen you in a while, because, I haven't been going to the office regularly because of COVID. And so now that we're back in session, so, I always say hi to like the janitors and security guards, and we have our little chit chats, and he's like, how you been? And I was like, hey, just as my grandfather used to always say, I'm among the living and the working. I got no complaints. And it's like, because the thing is, it's like, it's a blessing to have both. There's so many people who didn't make it through COVID, who just, for whatever reason aren't here. And then like, yes, we have to work for a living. Like I don't have, just money to like not ever have to work again. But there are a lot of people who would love to be working. And there are a lot of people who would love to be working at a job that they love. Like both of us are doing the thing when we were 20 years old when we met. You're doing the thing that you said you really wanted to do. I'm doing the thing that I said I really wanted to do, which like makes me so happy and so proud. When we were like starving, broke student, broke artist, and now it's like you're in your cabin, I'm in Brooklyn, like in my home. Like it's great.
So just to finalize, the one short message that you're going to be giving yourself is, time is relative. Enjoy what's going
Extend
on right
some
now,
grace.
and what your grandpa said.
I'm among the living and the working. No complaints.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Christina Greer.
Thank you for having me, Charlie.